Welcome back to another 2024 presidential prediction. This time we see the Overton window is shifting like crazy. The election is looking like a lockup. Let's get right into the results. So first and foremost, there is a notion of safe states and as well as states that are more in the swing variety. Now, battlegrounds are different from the safe states because there's reasons why you want to spend the money where you do. And when you look at an election, there's a finite amount of resources for both candidates, namely Republicans. And so you got to be really judicial as to what you're going to use the money for. So when we look at a secure state such as California, we're looking at another one like Oregon, Washington, a lot of the eastern seaboard as well. We look at these states and we notice how reputable they are for their one party. You see candidates like Donald Trump not wanting to spend there. So that's why it's important to demarcate these. Now, what's interesting, though, is that Donald Trump recently held a rally in New Jersey near Philadelphia and, in fact, got about 80 to 100,000 people to show up, which is utterly ludicrous. In fact, it looks like these states are in contention. I'm saying they won't be, but it's going to be a lot closer than people are used to. And that doesn't really matter for the state because the way the Electoral College works is that unless you win the majority of the votes in that state, you're not going to win any electoral count. What that means, obviously, is that putting money in New Jersey is a waste of time, but holding a rally that has ripples that play into a swing state like Pennsylvania, namely the eastern part where Trump needs to gain votes to win, it seems very useful to spend time there. Plus, it'll divert Democrat funds to these states that are safer blue and distract them from Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, these places that might actually be close. Now, also keep in mind in this election, we're talking about a circumstance to which where even if Trump gains, let's say he goes from -17 in a place like New Jersey to -9, the truth is that probably indicates a popular vote win. Now, what's crazy about a popular vote win is that a Republican hasn't had that since 2004, and that was by a narrow margin where Ohio was a swing state. The math is entirely different now. In fact, the Electoral College supports Republicans more than it ever has in the past 20 years. That's the fact. So when you look at a candidate like Donald Trump, who in the last election actually got really close to winning, despite losing the popular vote by over 4% according to the establishment figures, then we can trust with no degree of uncertainty that if he wins the popular vote, he's about 95% at odds of winning. And so that's why it's so important to demarcate what the safe states are, but also the margins they're in. Now, these might still be safe margins, but it's still important to notice that the difference between a 20-point loss and a 10-point loss in a place like California is the difference between like 2 or 3 million popular votes. And so when we're talking about that, that's immense. Just using my head math. Now, filling out these states in the red parts of the country, it doesn't really matter. Now, Nebraska's second district is in question, though. Of course, Nebraska's second district has been going through redistricting over the past several years. We have different candidates that do worse than others. Don Bacon, who seems to be doing great. That guy's more of a moderate, though, and he just struggles to win every time. Donald Trump is less palatable to that suburban Omaha base. That being said, though, we must really look at the facts. And it's looking like, again, if Joe Biden's going to really fumble across the entire country, then it's indicative that Trump might win. But for now, we're going to leave it blue. So let's put this right here, Nebraska 2nd District. Okay, that's one electoral vote. So it probably won't matter. But Ohio, Iowa, as well as other states are going to go red. Okay, so these two massive ones. On the contrary, I think that these two, Colorado and New Mexico, will go blue. That's just very obvious to me. Now, shifting a little bit of focus, we must look at Virginia as well. Virginia is a little bit in question. Let's look at the most recent polling. So the Virginia polling isn't really well invested in, and what we know about the money in politics is that they tend to spend it. Again, it's a finite resource for Republicans who we're not seeing the Trump campaign putting money into Virginia at all, which is to say that they don't think they're going to win the state, or at least not as confident as they are in contemporary states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, etc. That being said, the most recent poll from Mason-Dixon as of 4 months ago, in fact, says that Donald Trump is losing by about 6% with 8% other in the third party, namely probably Kennedy in that case. That being said, though, RFK Jr. is an important fixture in this election, so we're going to get into that later on. But this margin is closer than 2020 for the fact. Okay, so again, 2020 in Virginia was really bad for Donald Trump. So just double checking my math here, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by the order of about 500,000 votes in a state that isn't that large. In fact, he won it 54.15 to Trump's 44%. So that's about a 10-point win. Okay. So if Trump's losing by only 6, and the only poll I can refer to, that's a 4-point margin swing, which is kind of big. Now, that's still probably a Biden win, of course, but it kind of shows that If Virginia's that close, then New Jersey's also being close, which means the popular vote is looking really good for Donald, which means he probably will win it. So again, if he's doing several points better in New Jersey, several points better in Virginia, these traditionally blue states, then it's indicative that he will do several points better in the popular vote versus 2020, where he lost it by almost 5, which means he'll probably win the popular vote by 1 to 3% this time, which is huge because he's likely to win as long as he loses by less than 2, which is nuts. Now, what's super key about the other swing states I'm going to get to is that when we look at the priorities of the campaigns, we see Joe Biden campaigning in Florida. He's campaigning in places where he doesn't really need to. If I were Joe Biden and I had control of his coffers, I would first, number one, give it all to Donald Trump because obviously Joe is senile. But beyond that, of course, we need to look at where he would spend the money if he were smart. Okay, if I were him, we need to play defense because clearly you're an unpopular president across the board. I can pull out like 10 charts that would prove it numerically. But for the people that aren't autistic, take me at my word and just say, look, spend your money in Pennsylvania, spend your money in Michigan, spend your money in Wisconsin in that order. Then from there, you'd probably want to spend your money in Arizona, then Georgia. That's the logic. Now, the campaign for Biden is spending some money in Texas, which is asinine, by the way. I mean, it's like practicing the LSAT while you're not even in college yet. I mean, it's just a complete waste and complete lack of priorities in line for Joe Biden. But anyway, so North Carolina, on the flip side, is something that Trump should win pretty handily. I'd say by the order of 5 to 6%. And in fact, when you look at the results of last time, he did pretty well there considering the circumstance of him losing. Now, also keep in mind that Trump is not spending much money in the state, okay? The RNC chair, who nominally runs a lot of this stuff, the party infrastructure, the funding, okay, this guy, Michael Whatley, this guy was a really good organizer in North Carolina from what I remember. And so I think he'd be pretty well predisposed to make sure that this state on the cheap stays red. So that's a lock-in. Now, Trump has a floor of 234 electoral votes. So let's consult the rest of the election map. So New Hampshire, again, Trump is not spending a lot of money here, but it's indicative that if any of these safe blue states like New York, New Jersey, etc., are going to be a lot closer than before, then it's pretty sure that New Hampshire is going to be close. That being said, when you look at the math at the end of the day, when you're trying to get to the 270 prerequisite amount of votes to win this election, New Hampshire usually doesn't factor into that. In fact, the money's probably better spent in Nevada, where Trump's more favored, than New Mexico. So, New Hampshire. Now, that's the math. So again, this is very particular because Donald Trump, as of right now, has like a 75% chance of winning Nevada, which has 6 electoral votes, whereas New Hampshire only has 4, and he probably has a 60-40 chance of losing that one. So, I mean, if you're looking at it at a common sense state, then of course, if we're spending the same amount of money on one or the other, we're putting it in Nevada every time. And again, so what some people will misconstrue about this election is that, well, oh my God, the map is opening up. This could be a Reagan landslide. First of all, in contemporary politics, that's impossible. Things are too polarized, okay? You think your uncle that hates Donald Trump is going to flip sides just because Joe Biden sucks? Joe Biden could be a felon and they wouldn't care, okay? And that would actually make him cooler, probably. But anyway, so looking at this, New Hampshire just mathematically doesn't make sense for Republicans to invest in, which makes me think that Joe Biden should be able to coast off legacy Democrat support and Trump vitriol in that state. People hate him there for some reason. Now, moving on, similar bona fides also stretch into Minnesota. What we saw in Minnesota was that the thing that ails Biden in Michigan about the Gazan response and how he's sympathetic to the Palestinians or too pro-Israel at the same time and basically playing the middle and that not working out for him too well, basically that effect is not as prominent in Minnesota despite them having a lot of Islamic Somali refugees, which is interesting. I'm assuming it's because of a lack of political enthusiasm on their side that it doesn't get borne out like the longer living residents that are Islamic in Michigan and Dearborn, namely. Now, that means for you guys watching is that Minnesota is more likely to stay blue. Plus, they have Amy Klobuchar there that's having a ton of organization. In fact, she's a remarkable candidate. However much of a substitute teacher vibes she gives off, I mean, she still is very palatable to that electoral basis for no reason. I don't know. But anyway, the point is that state is probably going blue. And also, I don't see Trump investing a lot of money in this. In 2020, it made more sense because in 2016, it was a sleeper flip. It went for Trump by about 1%. So like I was saying, Donald Trump lost the state by only 1.5%. Now, this is insane because had Trump known that in hindsight, he probably would have put more money into the state. But because when we look at 2012, it wasn't really in play. In fact, Obama won it by 8. And so it just mathematically at the time didn't seem like Trump should have spent his money there. I think this could really happen in New Hampshire, by the way, or one of these other blue states where Trump doesn't spend any money in it, but it gets kind of close. So then in 2025, we might say, hey, we should have put some money there. But honestly, it's more important to win the 270 than to pad out a 325. Okay. Anyway, so we can see that was pretty close. In 2020, though, it went the complete opposite, which is insane, given that we had obviously Minneapolis on fire in a major extent and all that craziness. But we see that Joe Biden won it by a similar margin as Barack America, as he called Obama back then. And you see him winning by about 7% in Minnesota, which is nuts. And you can see how much of an influence electorally Minneapolis has in the Twin City area, and as well as these traditionally Democrat handle parts right here in the Northeast. So it looks like Trump, looking at this result, is probably not going to spend a lot of money here. And so it's indicative that given how well the party infrastructure is doing with Klobuchar, etc., that we can say the state's going to stay blue. Now, that being said, we can move on to another state like Maine. Maine's an extraordinarily tricky state to count, as well as it doesn't really matter at the end of the day in the math as well, because it's only 4 electoral votes, even though it's much bigger size-wise compared to New Hampshire. It's the exact same amount of votes. But either way, when you look at the 2016 result with a strong third party like RFK will be, you'll notice that Trump got close. In fact, he lost it by about 3, okay? Whereas if you compare that to 2012, Obama beat Romney by 16, which is fucking nuts. Sorry for cursing, but that is insane to me. Okay, look at this conglomeration of blue with the red pimple in the middle. But then when you look at 2016, all of a sudden it's mostly red. Okay, which again, it's insane. But moving on, in 2020, it reverts again, similar to Minnesota, where Trump does better than Romney did, but still not enough to invest money into. And so when you look at it that way, Trump only won 1 out of the 3 electoral votes, given how hokey this thing is set up, this electoral map where you have it split up. And so basically, how this works is that Joe Biden won it by 9. So what that's telling me is that Trump will probably not spend any money in Maine, which is smart, and he'll probably lose it by like 4 at large. But what matters is that he wins the rural part. So at large, it could still go blue by a couple percentage points, and we could have the second district, the rural part, go red, whereas this other part goes blue. So now we have a 226 to 235. If we look at it that way, that's about as close as the election will ever get. In the spirit of being absolutely thorough, if you're 12 minutes into my video, I'm going to give you the secret sauce, okay? If we look at Nebraska 2nd District, I know I hand-waved it at the beginning of the video saying that it didn't really matter, and it still doesn't, but let's break down why it really doesn't, and as well as why it's going blue again. Now, this is a really difficult call, because as we know, the Nebraska 2nd District went to Biden by about 6%. Now, that's a 7% shift, which is freaking crazy. So the suburban trend is nuts. That being said, the suburban trend as of 2022 has been curbed in the other direction. This is at the back of, again, crazy radical, LGBT, education, school board drama, stuff like that favors Republicans. And so we see the suburban mom trend kind of go in the other direction. Not crazy for Trump, but just saying like, okay, the Democrats are overcooking it. Women are wanting safety, and clearly they're not tough on crime. These Democrats usually aren't. And so we're really looking at a reversion on that case. But that being said, is that enough of an amount of change? Well, looking at it, at the facts, again, 6% difference, that is insane. But we must look at why that is, okay? So we already consulted the suburban drama. Now looking into the future, we see that Joe Biden is probably going to go from positive 4.5 in the popular vote to like negative 1 or 2. So that is almost exactly the difference in this Nebraska 2nd District. It all really goes down to who is going to be on the ballot with Trump. And so maybe it could go red if Don Bacon helps him out, who's more electorally viable. But we're going to leave it blue for now. It's super close. Anyway, moving on, I think another state that Trump can be confident in is going to be Nevada. Now, Nevada is super red for a couple of different reasons. So Nevada has been shifting red ever since Romney. In fact, it's been going to that extent, surprisingly, even in 2020. In 2020, it was more Republican than it was in 2016, despite the virus and things being worse overall. And so that kind of gives you an indication of the subtle movement. Now, think about it this way. Nevada was a strong Bernie Sanders state in 2020, which is indicative that they're not really a Biden state. They're not favorable or partial to him, unlike Minnesota, unlike Maine, or something like that, or New Hampshire, which is to say that it's more favorable than you'd ought to expect. So if anything, it's going to vote to the right of the country. Now, if the popular vote is any extent Republican, then it's going red. That's the common sense. And I don't even have to check the polls on that one. We can do that in another video. This video is more so the election prediction, as well as kind of breaking down exactly the logic behind all of these. Now, the reason why Wisconsin is going red as well is different from other ones, but we're going to consult that last. So Georgia, I think that's another floor state for Donald Trump. When we look at the people in Georgia that have done well, it's people like Brian Kemp, and it's people that are no-name Republicans, okay? Who has historically ran Georgia, but like standard Republican Southern guys. Now, Trump fits into that mold enough because to contrast him to Biden makes him palatable. If it were, a primary, would Trump do great in Georgia? You could argue it. That being said, the suburban trend that was so insane, plus the black turnout in 2020, that was an anathema to an old white guy running, is not going to really boost Biden up anymore. In fact, when we look at it one way, we see that Obama did worse, despite obviously being more palatable and charismatic and having more riz, frankly, than than Biden, Biden moment, in the state of Georgia, and he still didn't do as well. Now, that is to say, of course, that the trends are national, but to localize it, there are still some things to account for. So Georgia, in particular, in this case, is definitely going to be favorable to Trump. The reason being is because Donald has secured the economic security. He has secured the social conservative bona fides that are popular in Georgia. And so when we're looking at a place like Atlanta, we can see a characterization of what Biden represents. And a lot of people in those suburbs, those white people, are going to subconsciously be against that. Okay, we're seeing rampant crime. We're seeing self-checkout kiosks being taken out of Walmarts because obviously there's too much crime. That is going to be a common sense issue for people to run on. Down the ballot and even at the federal level, I think people will vote Trump. We can consult the polls too. Okay, so a couple of things on the state of Georgia. So when we look at Georgia, you notice in 2008, super low turnout. So this is just the good old boys voting. You see that out of less than 4 million votes, John McCain wins by about 5% in Georgia. Now, you can see obviously the Black Belt, which is like this southern stretch of rural black people. Obama wins, obviously, and also the urban area right here and some over here. Okay, that's obvious, and that's fine. But again, McCain wins because so much of this rural part is so cemented R. Okay. That being said, 2012, it actually expands for Romney. Again, Romney is nothing like the ilk of Georgia. Okay. This guy's definitely not good old boy Brian Kemp. No, he is definitely Beltway. And, you look at this guy, and again, he still wins by about 8. Again, similar trends with the black counties going blue, but still. And again, the turnout was 61%. Again, similar turnout, but Trump does worse. Okay. Now, what do you notice about this picture? When you look at this picture, okay, the ink blot tells you what. So if you look at this, the black parts aren't as strong for Hillary, obviously, but when you look at the suburban area in Gwinnett County and Fulton County, these areas in and around Atlanta, the metro area, it expands, okay? So you can see the turnout is high. Obviously, there's more people voting than in 2008. But what's also interesting is that, again, the Democrats are increasing their gains in the suburbs that are growing. Okay, so Georgia is taking in a lot of immigrants, but beyond that, of course, interstate travel. Now, 2020, turnout goes up again, another 6%. So there's about 5 million people voting, whereas again, with McCain, there was less than 4 million. So there's a 25% difference in the change of amount of people voting and the different amounts and groups of people voting. So when you look at this, Biden wins by 0.2. We know what happens, okay? But, just officially, that's the number. But you see this, and you notice that, again, the stronger amounts of, so the black turnout is still strong, even though Biden literally has nothing going for him in that department. But when we look at it this way, we notice that the suburban trend is strong, okay? Now, that's maxed out, though. That's the phenomena, okay? So referring to the 22 midterms, which was more recent than the last presidential election, you'll notice that I personally believe that the 2024 election in Georgia will be more similar to Brian Kemp versus Abrams than it would be to Walker versus Warnock, and I'll tell you why. So when it came to Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker, it became an issue of Herschel Walker being dumb, which was true. I mean, you get CTE, Antonio Brown, great guy, but again, not the smartest. And you look at him, and again, he lost narrowly. Now, keep in mind, okay, he lost by 3, but you see a vague idea of how the counties line up, okay? You can see how strong, again, Atlanta is in comparison. Now, you look at this one, where, again, Stacey Abrams did better in 2018. In fact, just to show you guys, you see 2018, Stacey Abrams just barely lost. She lost by about 1.4% here. You see this, okay? Now, you look at 2022, and again, Kemp wins by a lot. He wins by 8. Now, the reason why he won is because he came off like the stable person. He came off like the guy who was winning on the issues and was a safe vote, okay? In 2020, Biden was a safe vote. Now it's the opposite. People saw that Biden sucked, and now it's the issue of, okay, bring him back. Okay, bring back Donald Trump, and I think that's going to be the logic here. So that's a red state. I'm also going out on a limb here and saying that Arizona is going red, and by a good amount, okay? Now, what's important about this is that Arizona at the federal level isn't really in contention. Now, 8 months ago, I would have been stressing out about this, but now on my 21st birthday, by the way, I did not mention that. I will say this, I'm more confident than ever in Arizona. Now, At the Senate level, that's the discussion to be had. Obviously, Kerry Lake seems to be losing at this point, but Donald seems to do better because I think what makes Donald so powerful as a candidate is that what they have against them isn't landing, okay? And so let's consult this. So look at this. In Arizona, we had a huge contention with the Supreme Court basically vindicating and acceding to a old precedent from a law from, I think, over 100 years ago that said that, of course, abortion should be banned from, almost every circumstance. And that was super unpopular and for obvious reasons. That being said, Carrie Lake had basically supported that bill like 2 years ago, not knowing that she had to actually back that up at some point, which honestly I wouldn't have seen coming either. And then what happened was that she lost a ton of clout. That being said, of course, that didn't affect Trump because that's a state level policy. And Trump immediately rebuked that policy and said, you know what, we need to fix it and make it a partial birth abortion ban instead of something that's more drastic. And while obviously I disagree with that, again, that's politically smart and I endorse it. Now, this article is telling National Democrat strategies worry state abortion rights leaders. And then the subtitle, Democrats' efforts to ride the coattails of the abortion ballot measures put the passages at risk. So what that means is that the Democrats have often said, oh my God, let's talk elections. This liberal shill. He'll be like, oh my God, Arizona's going blue because of the passage of this pro-choice bill that's popular by like 2/3 of the electorate. Well, what does this political article show? It shows that the Democrats are actually hurting the passage of the bill. So what that means is that it's bone fried, and by that I mean like it's actually evident in the bones that Democrats are hurting the passage of the bills. So in a way, they're poisoning the well of their own policy because they're unpopular, which means they are losing. And so that's just evidence. That's all the evidence you need. Now let's consult some old math, okay? So in 2000, let's just go back to 2012 just to get a good sample size. We see that Mitt Romney, who's pretty good as a fit for Arizona. I live here. Okay, so he's winning by 8 percentage points. Okay, now keep that in mind. In 2016, Trump wins by about 3.5%. What you'll notice is that Maricopa was red at this point. Now in 2020, it switches. In fact, when the turnout goes up by 5%, Trump loses by 0.3. That being said, I personally know intimately the details about how the organization for vote gathering and ballot chasing, again, not ballot harvesting, which is legal in Michigan, but not in Arizona, ballot chasing is being well funded at this point. And so when we look at it, Arizona was not really safeguarded in 2020 as much as it would have been had Trump known in advance. And so I think the funding is important. Okay, remember 10 minutes ago, I was telling you about how Trump shouldn't spend money in Maine, New Hampshire, Minnesota, North Carolina. Instead, he should be spending the money on the swing states. I tell you that because back then he was spending money in 2020 on North Carolina. Brad Parscale, his campaign manager that got fired disgracefully, was spending money in New Mexico, etc. That money, tens of millions at least, is going to go to Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, etc. And so that just makes me all the more confident that we can fund a vote-getting operation that can not match the Democrats, but at least quell the bleeding. Okay, so when we look at, for example, 2020, the turnout went up 5% as compared to 2016. And again, the Democrats' vote share increased by about 4%. So you can see that when the voter turnout goes up, it favored the Democrats in 2020. Now, on the other hand, obviously, the turnout can't get much higher than it already is with all the mail-in votes. So the Democrats are topped out, but the Republicans haven't matched up to that energy. And so what that means is that basically in 2024, we're looking at an election map where the Democrats are already maxed out and the Republicans still have potential to grow. So it's kind of like if you're looking at a like Floyd Mayweather at 45 fighting Canelo at 30. And so back then, obviously, when Canelo was like 25 and Mayweather would have been, let's say, 35, Mayweather wins. But that was 2020. You age a little bit, and now Biden has more salinity, and Trump's still on his A game for the most part. And we see that the money is actually more even than it used to be. And we see that, again, the policies are favoring the Republicans more than it was last time, obviously. And so evidently, we have Trump winning Arizona. Now, moving on, I think we have some other states to consult, 3 more, in fact. Again, Trump almost has his election locked. If he had Nebraska 2nd District, he'd be tied to win. But moving on, we see that we have Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania in that order. Now, to be fair, there's some polls that have Wisconsin up for Biden. These aren't going to hold true, in my opinion. Again, at some point, they had Biden up in 2020 by 17 in Wisconsin. That was evidently wrong. In fact, they were wrong by about 16 percentage points, assuming the official numbers are true, which, Anyway, when we take it at face value, I think Michigan was the most blue state out of these 3. That being said, what Michigan has now that it didn't have before is that the Republican Party, I think, is more competent in 24 than it is in 20. And 2, I also believe that, for that matter, that when you look at somebody like the average Arabic voter for the Democrats that usually voted like 70-30 for the Democrats, these people are going to abstain from voting. They're going to vote third party. Jill Stein's going to blow up, stuff like this. Okay. So again, RFK not really going to be popular in the state. I'm thinking it's more of a Jill Stein Green Party vote. Again, this Gaza thing is killing Biden. He's super unpopular in that respect, and it's obviously why he's going to lose the state in part. Now, again, people will overblow this. Okay, the reason why Biden loses Michigan is probably 20% over this Israel stuff. It's probably 80% the bad economy, the lack of campaigning, Kamala Harris, all of it. Okay, so I think it's going blue. I mean red. Sorry. So let's consult the map. Okay, so in 2012, you look at the presidential election between Obama and Romney. You look at this, and again, a 10-point Obama win. Now, what do we see in the map features? We see that the rurals are very lightly red. Okay, a Republican, in order to win in any circumstance, needs to do really, really well in the rural regions. In fact, it's got to be like a 2-3 split, okay? It means 2 out of 3 people in a rural area ought to be voting Republican for a Republican to win in a state with a big metropolis or big city like Detroit. Ann Arbor, there's colleges, Spartans, Wolverines, okay? Plenty of Democrat votes to go around here, okay? So that means is that obviously you need to do better in the rurals, okay? So let's consult the Trump election. With the same amount of turnout, Trump wins Michigan very narrowly over Hillary Clinton. Now, what do we see that's different in this map? Well, we see for that matter that, of course, Trump does way better in the rurals, and the suburbs aren't great for him. But you notice that, again, he consolidates the parts in the mitten where you need to win. Okay, so these areas. And I was born right around here 21 years ago to this day. Okay, now in 2020, you look at this, and you see that Biden does a little better in the suburbs, even though Trump is still strong in the rurals. So again, a lot of the reason why Democrats did well last time has to do with the fact that, of course, they did well in the suburbs. That, again, is reverting. You saw that in 2022, and I think it'll get even worse for Dems this election. So that shows the math why he wins 2024. Again, this is without consulting the polls either, by the way. This is just pure logic. Now, you take Pennsylvania, and Trump's already won the election, but let's look at Pennsylvania. Actually, before I get any hate comments, let's just consult Wisconsin real quick and do my math here. Okay, so you can see why Romney lost by 7%, okay? You look at this and you see this, right? So, namely, again, where are the rural red? Okay, you want deep red in all these unpopulated areas, and yet we see this as all light red. That's weak sauce. And sure, he did great in the WOW counties, which is Ozaukee and these Indian named places, I think, Washington County as well. Okay, these are very suburban. These are very indicative of how you do with the suburban vote, which is interesting. But again, the prerequisites for a Republican to win statewide is do well in the rurals, do decent in the suburbs, win them slightly, and then hold your own and survive in the metropolis area. Okay, that's what you need to do. Okay, so for Romney to not even do well in the rural areas shows that even if he did do strong red results in the suburban areas, it's still not good enough. It didn't cut it. And so you see Obama win. Now, even in 2008, look at the math. The rurals, he got killed again, and still strong in the suburbs. But you know what? It didn't matter. Okay, 2004, we're going to even go further back. You see this? Again, Bush did amazing in the suburbs and, again, did Romney numbers outside. And so he actually got really close to winning. Let's go to 2016. Trump wins by 1%. Now, what's different about this is, again, you look at the rurals. He did amazing. Look at this. Again, all this, the Racine area. So the Driftless area, the southwestern region, again, all pretty unpopulated. But again, you need to muster up as many votes as you possibly can in this case. And again, Bernie Sanders won this primary. So you can see that the Hillary establishmentarian Democrat did not do well. Now, 2020, you see this result. Biden wins narrowly. But what do you notice? Trump still did really well in the rural areas. And again, the where the colleges are were really good for the Democrats. Again, I don't know if that was harvesting of votes, but funding and basically getting all the votes in cheap ways helped the Democrats out. And so the Republicans having that turning point action sort of ballot chasing operation will certainly help them win votes in 2024, just in a logistical sense. But you see that Trump at least has the bona fides to get the rurals. Now all he has to do is get the suburban vote. Anyway, now back to Pennsylvania. So let's look at 2012, okay? So when we look at it, we see that the turnout it doesn't even tell me, but what you'll notice right off the bat is that we have 3 or 4 different places in the state that are going to be Democrat in most elections. First, that's going to be the southeastern part, close to New Jersey, i.e. why Trump did the rally in New Jersey, okay? The Philadelphia place. Super blue in this case, okay? Super blue for Obama. That's where he ran up the vote. We look at, again, some other counties. Again, these are suburbs. Again, this is indicative of how well you're doing as a Republican. Center County, dead center, obviously. It's literally called center. That's nominally blue, just slightly. Erie County up here where the Great Lake is, and Pittsburgh, okay, where the mid franchise called the Steelers are. Now, we look at 2016. Trump kills it in the rurals. Again, that's a formula. That's a formula. Tipping point state, Erie County. Now, center's still blue, Pittsburgh's still blue, obviously, but not really deep blue either. And again, Trump does a little better around here as well. So you see the math. You see how he can do well. He's not losing any rural votes to Joe Biden. I promise you that. And so the question is how well he will do in the suburbs. It's indicative that if he's doing vote getting in the Philadelphia radio region, which is northwestern New Jersey, then it shows that he's pretty confident he can win. In 2020, again, similar results. He did amazing in the rurals, but he lost Erie. And when you look at the suburbs, he did a little worse, and that's what flipped the state. Okay, so we still see the math. Okay, so we can see that Trump is probably going to win the state, but it's going to be indicative on how he does in this county right here, Erie, and center, as well as the suburbs around here. Okay, and Philadelphia, again, are black people going to turn out for Biden in 2024 like they did in 20? My guess is probably not. So your final result for today is 312 electoral votes for Donald John Trump, and who knows who his VP is going to be. Then we've got Joe Biden and Kamala Harris getting 226 electoral votes. As you can see, obviously, I already told you in my prediction, Nebraska 2nd District does not matter in the math because obviously Trump won by too much for it to matter, as does not obviously New Hampshire or Maine. It didn't matter. That being said, it'd be nice to have, but I see Trump's ceiling also including maybe Minnesota, New Hampshire, etc., and the 2nd District, but it doesn't matter, like I said. This election is basically the same thing as 2016, just plus Nevada, but the way we get there is pretty remarkably different. In this video, I wanted to tackle the expert opinion of how we break down the science behind this, okay? So this was the 2024 election prediction using just my logic and not even using charts for the most part, okay? Let me know in the comments down below if you agree with that notion, if you like this sort of format. Let me know what else you want to see, and also like the video and subscribe, okay? Subscribe if you love me. If you don't, it's my 21st birthday. You got to do it, buddy. See y'all on the next one.